It's interesting and not a little depressing that so many years into the debate on trade and environment, trade and climate change, we're still essentially talking about how we deal with the overlapping regimes and how we deal with the frictions that arise when the two regimes interact. And that we haven't found a way to go very much beyond that. And I think that the challenge that we all face today is precisely that. It is not, as it was in the first years, and as Ambassador Kwok said so well, an issue of how you chop up what belongs to trade and what belongs to labor and what belongs to the environment and allow each camp to deal with those issues on their own. I think we've discovered that we simply can't do that. They all deal with each other's issues, and we have to find a better way. But most of what we've focused on, and this is evident also today, is to try and examine, try and identify where frictions are likely to occur. You know, where the satellite is going to crash down to Earth. And then rummage around in our toolbox just to look at the tools that we're using, the tools that we're not yet using, the provisions that are there in the legal articles that could be brought forward to try and deal with those frictions. And it's difficult because we're in general operating in an atmosphere of very low trust. Very low trust between governments, very low trust between governmental agencies and the non-governmental world. And this is not only true, not only evident in the WTO with the difficulties faced by the Doha round, it's evident in the world of climate change, and in fact it's evident in more and more areas of international interaction. If you look at the preparations for Rio, there's nothing like the enthusiasm that there was 20 years ago when the original Rio conference was being put together. So what I'd like to do in my short time is to take a look forward at how we might go beyond the approach that we've tried and has, you know, it's not a failure, it's functioned in many ways, but that I suspect is really not up to the task. I think we need to figure out the kind of game that we're trying to play into and then work out what are the rules of that new game. Now, if you look at, take a very traditional look at the WTO, there are many ways in which it makes progress towards the resolution of issues. The one we're most familiar with is negotiations, but I think nobody is really looking to negotiations, at least in the short term, to deal with the issues of interaction among regimes. The Doha round is an increasing embarrassment, and I can say this because I'm an NGO. It's as if it's gone down a mine and there hasn't been any sign of life for a long time. We're all trying to avoid the horrible conclusion that maybe something went wrong down there. But I don't think as we look forward to resolving the trade and climate change issues, anybody's thinking that we should craft a negotiation agenda and get all the countries around the table to discuss it. WTO also generates mutual understanding. There are a lot of issues that were contentious in the WTO world some time ago, and they're not contentious anymore. They haven't been solved. They haven't been resolved through negotiation or rulemaking. They've simply gone away. And I think that's one area where WTO has been extremely successful. But in some of these issues, it's hard to think that a better understanding of one another's position is going to be sufficient to deal with the possible clashes. And so it all comes down to dispute settlement. And dispute settlement, I think, has a very fine track record over the years of WTO's existence. And it has, in fact, clarified a great many issues. And we heard today from Joost how it, despite the fact that it's not supposed to set precedent, it sets precedent all over the place and is continuously invoked in trying to understand how the rules should be understood and applied. Now, are there other ways? Because those are the ones we always look to. Those are the ones that we always consider, that we either should take it out of the WTO or within WTO deal with it through negotiation, through regular discussion in the committees, or through sending it to the dispute settlement body. And I think that we should look forward to the ministerial at the end of this year as a real opportunity to think how we might do things differently, how we might try out some new things and not simply rely on these approaches that have had success in some areas, but aren't generating success at the pace necessary to really move forward on some of these problems. I think that if we are able to ignore the elephant in the room, ignore Doha, somehow agree not to mention that four-letter combination at the ministerial, and instead look at what else one might do, I think that there really is scope to advance. Now, what sorts of things might be done? And some of these might sound politically unrealistic, some of them might sound outrageous, but it is, I think, the sort of thing that we ought to be thinking about and talking about as we prepare the ministerial and as we go forward. I think one thing that we should conclude is that separateness is dead. That we shouldn't even think in terms of it anymore, that there is the WTO that can handle labor and employment and social protection floors and the rest, and that as long as they get on and do that, we can do trade here and everything will be fine. I think that notion is really behind us. And it's true in the area of social development, it's true in the area of environment, it's true in the area of climate change. It's actually inconceivable to think that you can surgically separate some of these areas and then deal with them effectively without creating the kind of monsters that will come back to haunt us. The second thing I think we need to do is to accept that there are overriding goals for humanity. I would say that sustainable development is one of them. Others would formulate it differently: poverty alleviation, respect for human rights. You can call it whatever you want, but the notion there is that there are overriding goals. There is a place that we would like to get to, and that trade is one way of getting us to that. Environmental cooperation is one way of getting us to that. But in a sense, everything that we do has to be subordinated to the global overriding goals. Aaron passed around a book this morning where we tried to look at what that would imply for sustainable development if the trading system were genuinely to take its preambular goal seriously and decide that everything it did would help it move towards that goal of sustainable development. What would the trading system look like? And of course, the answer is that it would look quite different from the way it looks today. But I think that kind of discipline is the discipline we need to put ourselves through. What would it mean to have a trading system that supports the transition to a green economy? What would it mean to have a trading system that generates employment, that generates the capacity to provide worldwide a social protection floor? What would it mean to have a trading system that allows us to manage the Earth's resources in full knowledge of their finite nature? And I think that we don't know what it means because we don't have the forums in which those things can be properly discussed. As Vesile just said, CTE has a technical agenda, and it's been soldiering forth very bravely on that technical agenda, and I think it's achieved some advances. It's certainly achieved a far greater understanding of where the issues lie. But the pace at which it works is not keeping up with the pace at which global problems are developing. So we need something different, and perhaps something different would include a series of forums in which the WTO, and I mean WTO in the wider sense, the WTO community comes together and discusses what it would mean to come up with a trading system that generates jobs and reduces unemployment, provides opportunities for the youth of the future. I think we haven't tried that sort of thing. We talked, somebody mentioned at the coffee break or at lunch break, the global trade alert and how that kind of third-party mechanism outside of WTO actually generated a space where the WTO itself could start tracking protectionist measures. And the conclusion that the WTO did it better than the global trade alert is actually a very interesting conclusion. What it means is that there's capacity in the Secretariat for analysis, for risk-taking, for innovation that is mostly tied down and can't be used because the members hold it down. Well, maybe if we liberated some of that talent, some of that innovative capacity to deal with some of these issues, the Secretariat could put on the table in front of the trade policy community a number of interesting ideas about the future. I think this is the sort of thing that we need to get to. Raymond suggested that we need to agree on limited forms of green discrimination in the interest of a wider goal. Well, maybe we should be thinking of this kind of thing. It's not beyond the capacity of the WTO to figure out how to do it in the least discriminatory way, how to make sure that it actually does advance us towards an agreed goal. So I think that the challenge is not so much to figure out how we deal with the little clashes that arise. I think we're pretty good at that. I think we know how we would do it. And I think when it comes to border carbon adjustment, we can figure out a best practice code that we would expect countries to follow. We can deal with the individual problems as they arise. But I don't think that we have yet figured out how we can ratchet the entire game up, how we can begin to show success in actually resolving some of the issues that arise at the interface instead of just understanding them better. And I think that that is going to require the kind of leadership that we've seen very little of in the past. And I'm not referring to the Doha round, I'm referring to global interaction in general. It is a little bit depressing. So how can we get the focus on solutions that will work for both communities and advance a clear public policy goal in a significant way? That, I think, is the challenge that we face, and perhaps the ministerial is the place to get it started.